Okay, Jill, it's 9:30 and we have quorum.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just 1 second. Testing again, Bob Ferguson. Testing your sound. Mr. Chairman, yes, we have quorum. So,
Bob, you can silent observer. If you really want to say something, you can phone in on the 905-815-6095 number and relay it to us.
And to vote,
Okay,
Mr.
quorum.
Chairman, he can put his hand
So
up.
I will call this virtual meeting of Heritage Oakville to order and say how nice it is to see everybody again. And I hope you all had as good a Thanksgiving as the current circumstances allowed and that you all stayed safe. Once again, I'll thank all of the people who work away in the background to make this virtual meeting happen. It's a lot more work than the physical one, I'm sure. I don't believe there are any registered delegations today, but if any members of the public who are watching our program today feel that they want to participate or to say something with respect to any of the items that we deal with, they should call 905-815-6095 and let the clerk know that they wish to speak. The materials and the agenda were all distributed to us in hard copy, and any member of the public can access those materials at oakville.ca. What else have I got to say? During the meeting, it'll be the normal format that we've now adopted. The staff will make a presentation on each agenda item. The presentation will appear on our screens. At the end of that presentation, good morning, Russ. You're not a regret. Glad to see you. After that presentation is over, we'll have the opportunity to ask questions of staff. We'll then look for any delegations if there are any. If there are none, we will then discuss it amongst ourselves. And as usual, the voting protocol will be that I will be looking for anyone opposed to the motion. Okay, I should advise everybody again that we are an advisory committee and that any advice we want to give to Planning and Development Council will be dealt with at their meeting on Monday, the 26th day of October at 2 p.m. Anyone wishing to register to speak should get in touch with the clerk in advance because that takes a little bit of organising to do. I think these are all the standard introductions, other than to say that we thought we had regrets, and Russ is now here. Any other regrets, Madam Chair? I don't think so.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Secretary, rather. Yep. Okay, so I'll call the roll then of all those who are here. Russ Buckland is here, Drew Bucknell is here, Kerry Colborne is here, Councillor Duddick is here, Bob Ferguson is here, Councillor Gittings is here, George Gordon is here, Daniela Hampton-Davis is here, Sue Hobson is here, Brenda Sweeney is here, and Jerry Tino is here. So we're all read into the record. Okay. So the first item on our agenda is to ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest with respect to any of the matters before us today. Seeing none, we'll move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. These were circulated. Are there any comments on these? Would somebody like to give me a motion to approve? Councillor Duddock has a motion to approve the minutes as distributed. Is anyone opposed? No one is opposed. The minutes are adopted as distributed. Okay, the first discussion item is the Knox Presbyterian Church 16 and Cemetery. It's a cultural heritage landscape research report. And I guess that'll be Sue, and I see her moving to the podium now. Sue, it's up to you.
Mr. Chairman, did you read the chair's statement when the recommendations go forward? Mr. Chairman, did you read the chair's statement for the recommendations to go forward?
Yes, I did.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I am very happy to take you through today's report about Knox 16 Church. It's a project that we have been working on since last year with members of the congregation and their full support, which is absolutely wonderful. So Knox 16 Church and Cemetery is located on Dundas Street West. It's located right at the corner of Lions Valley Park Road, which used to be the road that led into the 16 Hollow Village, and now it's the road that leads down into Lions Valley Park. So the property actually has been designated since 1978. However, that was before Ontario Regulation 906 was around, and the designation bylaw therefore doesn't really meet the requirements of the current day Ontario Heritage Act, in that it doesn't really say very much about what the value is for the property and what the heritage attributes of the property are as well. And so we have been working with the church in order to update the designation bylaw, and our wonderful researcher, Elaine Eigel, has completed a very thorough background report for the church, as well as completing a new analysis. And we have determined that with the new research and analysis, the property isn't just a church, it's actually a cultural heritage landscape. And so, as we all know, the town of Oakville has some really strong policies about how to conserve cultural heritage landscapes. We have policies in the Livable Oakville Plan, as well as our own cultural heritage landscape strategy. And these municipal level policies are supported by provincial policy in the Ontario Heritage Act, the Planning Act, and the Provincial Policy Statement from 2020. So I think most of you will remember that we have been dealing with the cultural heritage landscape strategy implementation in 3 phases. And the first phase started with an inventory back in 2016, I believe, where we looked at 63 different properties across the town of Oakville. And at that time, we noted that there would definitely be more properties coming forward in the future that we hadn't included in the inventory, but still might be candidates for cultural heritage landscape designation. And so Knox 16 was already designated at the time, and it wasn't picked up in that inventory. But as I said, over the past year and a half or so, as we have been working on a new research report and a more thorough evaluation against the requirements of Ontario Regulation 906, to update the 1978 designation bylaw, we have determined that the property meets the criteria for a significant cultural heritage landscape, and thus we are recommending that the property at Knox 16 be introduced into that implementation of the cultural heritage landscape strategy. So the research assessment report, I hope you enjoyed reading. I know, again, it's one of Elaine's specialties is research, and she has put together an incredibly thorough report based on so many different sources, from reaching out to the congregation, from the wardens and the Reverend of Knox Presbyterian 16, to materials from the Land Registry Office, our local historical societies, as well as the Ontario Genealogical Society, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, so many other different sources as well. We've also completed numerous site visits between both Elaine and myself. We've been out there about 5 times in the past year or so. And our last meeting actually, I don't think was even recorded in the site visits, because we did go out this summer as well to have an outdoor, socially distanced meeting with the wardens of Knox Presbyterian 16 in order to go over actually this draft research report and hear their comments on it. So everything that we're bringing forward today does have the full support of the church, and we are so happy to be a partner with them as we move forward in this process. The assessment that's included in the research report does indicate that the church and the cemetery together are considered to be an organically evolved, a continuing cultural heritage landscape. The property is a picturesque example of a mid-19th century Ontario Protestant church and cemetery. It retains an active role in contemporary society, as the church community is still quite active. And collectively, Knox 16 articulates the almost 175-year-old evolution of this church and its congregation, their spiritual needs and burial needs, and their practices. and we are so happy to still be working with them today. So there are a ton of interesting images in your reports. Here we have, I believe it's the 1847 map of the 16 Hollow Village, which then, of course, was called Proudfoot's Hollow as well. You can see here that our chapel is located up on the top of the hill, right at the bend where you go down, you see that car about to go down that terrible hill into the village, which is now Lions Valley Park. Here we've got a couple of shots of the church from both present day as well as, I think the lower photo is probably around the 1980s, maybe early 1990s. You can see that the church hasn't changed particularly. It's been well maintained by the members of the congregation who are always actively trying to make sure that they're staying on top of the maintenance and the restoration and repair work that's required to keep their little church in pristine condition. You'll also notice that we've also included, with the church's permission, several interior features. And so these would specifically be that beautiful ceiling that they have in the church, as well as their historic plaster walls, which also received a heritage grant this year in order to help them make some of those necessary repairs. And then, of course, once you get outside, the cemetery is a wonderful little place to look around. If you're ever in need of a quiet place to go, I highly recommend taking a little stroll out in the cemetery. Burials do continue to this day. As I say, it is still a continuously evolving landscape, but of course it has some very interesting historic stones and markers and family plots through it as well. So the conclusion that we're bringing forward today is that NOC 16 slide directly into phase 3 of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy implementation, which is putting new protection measures in place. And this would mean that we would create a new designation bylaw, and you can see some of the draft materials that we would look at, including in that designation bylaw, in the research report in very draft form, as well as a conservation plan for the cultural heritage landscape. And that would provide both the town, being staff, council, and Heritage Oakville, as well as the property owners, NOC 16, some assurances about how maintenance and heritage permits would be dealt with in the future. So those the conservation plan is something that we are looking forward to working with again with the congregation in order to make sure that that plan works both for them and for us. And so the recommendation before you today is to endorse the Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report, which is Appendix A to your agenda, and that Knox Presbyterian Church 16 and Cemetery be recognized as a significant cultural heritage landscape and move into phase 3, the implementation of protection measures. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. So you said it, and I've said it many times, and we all have. It's just wonderful to get these reports. And I'm sure this particular one will be grabbed by the archivist at the church and the elders there, and it'll go into the church records because it's such an excellent summary with great pictures and little anecdotes about the history of the church. So that's a big plus for them. They're actually getting that out of this process, which is good to see. Does anyone have any questions of Sue? I don't see anybody, and I'm not surprised, Sue. The report is excellent, and it's such a good news thing. I mean, I don't think there's anything that we would have difficulty with on this. Okay, if there are no questions of Sue, then I will ask the general question if there's anyone out there, Madam Secretary, who's contacted you to indicate that they want to say something.
Mr. Chairman, there are no delegations.
Okay, so nobody has called in. So it's up to us to deal with it. Any comments from anyone? I think we're just happy to see it. It's such a great report, super report. Okay, if there are no further comments, then we have a staff recommendation that we endorse this report and that we move to phase 3. Can I have a mover of that motion? Okay, George, that's appropriate. Thank you, George. So George has moved the motion that the staff recommendation be adopted. Are there any opposed to that motion? Seeing none, I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much, Sue. So the next item on the agenda is a summary of the impact of the changes on the under the Ontario Heritage Act, Bill 108. And Sue has given us an excellent report. And George, I'm sure that you will have loved to read that because it's lots of legal stuff and lawyery things, and maybe we'll hear some comments from you. Sue, would you like to walk us through this and help us to follow the thread of all the ins and outs and all of the subsections that we had to look at?
Yep, certainly. I'm just waiting for the presentation to be opened here. I'm glad you found it interesting. I feel quite bad, actually, that this is a report that is so heavy on the text and not a lot of particularly interesting photographs. But it is what it is when you deal with policy. Sorry, I think we're still in the wrong presentation here. Yes, there we go. I think the one image here I have is the map of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The changes, though, to the Ontario Heritage Act do apply to the entire province. And so where this is all coming from is in May of 2019, the province released a housing supply action plan as well as an updated growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. That came into effect on May 16th of 2019. And very shortly afterwards, Bill 108, which is known as the More Homes, More Choice Act, came forward through the Provincial Environmental Registry for comment to make changes to 13 different pieces of provincial legislation, and one of those was the Ontario Heritage Act. There was a very tight turnaround, as there almost always is, for providing comments to the province on Bill 108, but the town did get a report into Planning and Development Council to talk about the proposed changes, which were very wide-ranging, including a number of our concerns regarding the proposed changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. One of those concerns was that at that time, the province had indicated that there would be a number of new regulations coming for the Ontario Heritage Act, but they hadn't been released. I do believe that the province had intended to release them earlier than this. However, due to our ongoing uncertainty of 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm sure many other issues that the province is dealing with that they didn't anticipate, the regulations for the Heritage Act were not released until September 21st, 2020 for comment through the Environmental Registry. And the deadline that we have to get those comments back into the province is November the 5th. So the other thing that has been indicated is that there will be revisions to the Ontario Heritage Toolkit, which are the kind of user manuals, I guess, for the Ontario Heritage Act. We've heard that they're in progress, but they have not yet been released for comment. We do hope them to come later this fall, and we also hope that there will be time to get them forward to Heritage Oakville and Council for comment as well. So the staff report has provided a summary of the proposed regulatory changes. And this is kind of my summary slide. I'm not going to read it because I'm going to go into detail on each one of these things, and that's a lot of text. One of the biggest things that the proposed regulation has done is included new principles that provide context for the municipality to follow when they're making decisions about designated properties. And those include principles that talk about minimizing the adverse impact of any alterations to the cultural heritage value of a property, to consider the views of all interested persons and communities when council's making decisions about heritage properties, and that it should be used in conjunction with Ontario Regulation 906, which itself has not been proposed to be changed yet in any way, shape, or form. So the principles go alongside with the regulations in 906 that we're already quite familiar with using. In regards to the principles themselves, I would note that staff use many of these similar principles in our review process already, and I think that the committee would agree with that. A couple of the changes, though, that we've noted that may be of concern include a difference in the wording regarding the conservation of cultural heritage value. And so the proposed principle for the Ontario Heritage Act says that property is determined to be of cultural heritage value or interest should be protected and conserved for all generations. We would note, however, that the changes to the provincial policy statement from this year, from 2020, state that significant built heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved. The use of shall versus should is always something that has, I think, been greatly debated in many forms of legislation. We would definitely prefer the wording shall be conserved, and we would request that the province consider making this language in the principle more in line with what they already have in their up-to-date provincial policy statement from 2020. They've also introduced a new definition that applies in this context of principles for adaptive reuse. And what I've shown here on the screen is actually the wording that staff are suggesting, because right now what they have proposed is that the alteration of a property of cultural heritage value or interest to fit new uses or circumstances while retaining the heritage attributes of the property. We feel that it should be the cultural heritage value or interest and the heritage attributes of the property in order to be consistent with other pieces of legislation and also to ensure that we have the best conservation tools possible. The regulations propose changes to the content of designation bylaws. Most of these changes actually aren't particularly onerous, I don't think. They now require us to include a map or image of the area actually within the bylaw itself. We've tried that in the past and received negative feedback from the Land Registry Office, and so we are certainly hoping that the province is talking to the Land Registry Office to ensure that this requirement can actually be done. Because from our end, it's not a problem or a chore. We have these maps already available in the location maps that we circulate with every staff report. So as long as the province works that out with the Land Registry Office, it's a change that we're certainly happy with because we do feel that the map or image can make things very clear. They've also requested that the description of heritage attributes in a designation bylaw shall be brief, but at the same time, we also need to explain how each attribute contributes to the overall cultural heritage value or interest of the property. We're not opposed to doing this, and actually we think that it does help people understand how the tangible attributes can relate back to value statements, but we would note that the requirement for an explanation may make the description less than brief. The province has not provided a definition of what brief is, and so I assume we will deal with that as best as we can. And then another new requirement is that the bylaw may list any features of the property that are not heritage attributes. And so where this would come into play is, for example, if you were designating a property where you were solely interested in the house on the property, not the 1980s garage that was added on. And so within the designation bylaw now, you can actually list these kind of exemptions from the heritage designation bylaw to note that they're not, we recognize that they're not heritage features or attributes of the property. We have done this in the past for property owners who have specifically requested it through an explanatory note within a designation bylaw, but this will actually, I think, make the process a little bit cleaner and easier for everyone to read. And so the next kind of section of regulatory changes deals with timeline changes. And so what the province has now determined is that there is a 90-day deadline to issue a notice of intention to designate following one of a number of actions, which I have also defined. But I think for the purposes of our discussion today, a complete planning act application is the most important. And so I believe the province intends this provision to be used so that designations don't come out of the blue and surprise property owners, which we hope that it never would. However, They have also set out a set of exemptions for the 90-day timeline that staff feel will be very beneficial, because we do actually have a number of wonderful developers that we work with in Oakville who are not opposed to heritage designation, and who, through this new exemption, could enter into agreement with the town to extend or that 90-day timeline through mutual agreement with the town. And so that would ensure that heritage designation bylaws aren't placed over an entire subdivision when the intention in the end is only to designate one lot within that subdivision. It's very helpful when you're looking at the relocation of a historic house, for example. And so we feel that that exemption is a very useful tool to have if this is the rule that the province wants to have in place. We would, however, note that there isn't enough time for the town to request and review a peer review of a heritage impact assessment that's been submitted by a developer. And so we would recommend that either the 90-day timeline be increased or an additional exemption maybe be included in order to address requirements for peer review when we do not feel that the documentation provided by the applicant has been sufficient to actually make a decision. These new timelines will certainly require significant changes to our internal processes in order to accommodate these regulations. And so that's going to take a good amount of staff time to coordinate between heritage staff, planning staff, our legislative quarter, and legal staff as we kind of work our way through the new world order. There's also a new 120-day timeline to pass a designation bylaw. And so this is referring to after the objection period has expired or the conclusion of a hearing has expired, the town now has 120 days to actually move forward and pass a designation bylaw. And so there are exemptions, again, proposed. It's similar to the 90-day notice requirement. So through mutual agreement is one of those, which is helpful in case there is a rare occurrence of there being a need to hold off on issuing that bylaw. I would say that our general practice, though, is to pass that bylaw as soon as we get approval to do so. So, at the next council meeting following the expiration of a 30-day appeal period where we haven't received any objections, or at the conclusion of a CRB or LPAT hearing where we have a decision we can implement. And so, while implementing these regulations will require a little bit of adjustment to our internal processes, the practice itself isn't far off from what we already do anyways. The 60-day timeline for complete application. And so complete application is actually a new thing for the Ontario Heritage Act, although it's not new for those of us who deal with planning applications. Because the Planning Act has had rules about complete applications for many years, and now the Ontario Heritage Act does as well. And so what this means is that the town will have 60 days from the date of submission of materials to the town in order to deem the application complete. And so they also have a list of submission requirements that the province has set out in the regulations about the type of material that could be required. And their list is actually quite similar to the list that we have already through our heritage impact assessment and heritage permits. However, we do recommend that a more thorough review of proposed materials be undertaken and a separate report be brought back forward to Heritage Oakville and then to Council to confirm our list of required submission materials so that this can be adopted by municipal bylaw, because that's a new requirement of the regulation. We've also, in our review of the proposed regulations, noted that the requirements for this complete application are only applied to Part 4 designated properties, and they don't apply to properties within heritage conservation districts. And as we do deal with quite a few properties in our 4 heritage conservation districts, we recommend that the requirements for complete application also be applied to district properties. Another part of the proposed regulations deals with notice requirements for demolitions. And this was one of the concerns that staff had identified in our Bill 108 report that went to Council last year. essentially the new regulations or the new Ontario Heritage Act does require the issuance of notice for the demolition of any heritage attribute of a property. And so we were looking for clarification as to what happens if we were to take through a heritage permit application to add on a new addition to a property that meets all of the district plan guidelines, but it requires the removal of a single historic window at the rear of the structure, which we've determined will not have an overall negative impact on the property. Does that mean we have to issue notice of demolition for essentially what's a new addition or an alteration? And so they've provided some additional clarifications here, especially because the way that the old Ontario Heritage Act was worded, when you took through a notice of a demolition of a designated property, one of the things that then should result from that is the repealing of a heritage designation bylaw. And so they have now noted that a repealing bylaw may not be required for every demolition of any heritage attribute. We've also received clarification that if demolition or removal of a heritage attribute is permitted, if council says that the cultural heritage value or interest in the overall heritage attributes do not need amending, meaning we don't have to change the bylaw, the only notice requirement we have to give is to the Ontario Heritage Trust, which we do already anyways. They receive notice of all of our heritage permit applications. We've also noted that there is some confusing wording in the regulation. We'd just like some additional clarity on, given that we're not sure if the removal of any building, even one that is not identified as a heritage attribute in the bylaw, for example, modern garden shed, would require council approval. Currently, through our delegation bylaw, the removal of non-historic additions or outbuildings under 15 square meters can be approved by staff, and we would like to keep that in place because essentially it does mean that these modern structures that were never really intended to be contributing to the overall heritage value of the property, we don't see the need for them to go through a lengthy 60 to 90-day approval process when it's quite clear that the structure was put up 10 years ago. The regulations also have some new requirements about submission to the LPAT. One of the things that Bill 108 did was to create this new two-tier process of objection to heritage designation to a municipality, meaning that we would bring forward a report to council that recommended designation, and the property owner could object directly to the municipality. The municipality would consider that objection and then make a decision on whether or not they wanted to proceed with the heritage designation, and then an appeal would go to the LPAT if the owner wanted to proceed with the appeal after that. So this new two-tier process isn't something that staff support, but it is still there. The regulations haven't changed it. All they've done is provide a list of the materials and the information that are required for submission for an LPAT appeal. So it's more of a procedural change that the Heritage Committee would never have to deal with. Another housekeeping amendment that they've made to in the regulations is the ability to amend a heritage designation bylaw through a slightly more streamlined process, which we fully support because it does make it easier for us to update old designation bylaws as required. And then finally, the regulations also include that there are transitions proposed about how to deal with applications that are in process, designations that are in process when the implementation deadline of January the 1st, 2021 goes into effect. So far, we feel that we need more time, I guess. As these regulations just came out September 21st, we haven't had any time to prepare or account for the new processes that we will have to deal with. And we recommend that the proclamation deadline be pushed to July 1st, 2021. This would give municipalities a bit more time to prepare, to figure out which applications are in transition and which new processes they need to follow, as well as creating the new processes for everything coming in after the proclamation deadline. And given that we're now kind of returning to stage 2, or we're in the second wave, I guess, of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a stress on staff resources that we would certainly request more time to be permitted in order to get these new regulations implementation. Pushing the proclamation deadline back hopefully would also allow us to consider the new Ontario Heritage Toolkit as well when it comes out later this fall. And we feel that's a very important piece, as it does, as I say, provide kind of user-friendly guidelines on how to apply the revisions to the Ontario Heritage Act and these new regulations as well. So overall, I would say that staff do support many of the proposed regulatory changes, although concerns that we identified in our original Bill 108 report last year certainly do remain. The biggest thing is time. So many of the town's existing processes will need to be adjusted in order to conform to these regulatory changes. And so our recommendation, again, is that more time be provided to municipalities to accommodate and plan for these new regulations, given, again, the COVID-19 pandemic and also the fact that we haven't seen the Ontario Heritage Toolkit yet. Staff resources will need to be evaluated in light of the volume of heritage alteration applications, so heritage permit, in order to ensure that we're delivering our reports and notices within the specified timelines. The province has noted that they don't know what the cost and burden would be in order to implement these changes. We're suggesting that they would be significant, given how stressed out municipalities already are with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic especially. Heritage planning staff we're also in the process of undertaking a new large project to review our properties listed on the Heritage Register under Section 27. Those are the properties that are considered to have potential cultural heritage value and aren't fully designated yet, either under Part 4 or Part 5. And this review involves requesting additional staff to help with that project. It may be possible that if we do have new staff in heritage planning, they could assist us with the transitions that are required to implement these proposed regulatory changes. But that's all, I would say, quite up in the air at the moment. And then I think our closing comment is that while we do support a number of the regulatory changes, which are really procedural in nature, we do remain concerned the province's objective to increase housing supply should not come at the cost of the expense of the town of Oakville's irreplaceable cultural heritage resources, as the purpose of the Ontario Heritage Act is to protect and conserve heritage properties, not to build more homes. And so the staff recommendation before you today is that the report be submitted, endorsed and submitted to the province along with any additional council resolutions as the town of Oakville's comments to the environmental registry. I would note further that any members of the public who are watching this today may also provide comments on the Bill 108's proposed regulatory changes through the Environmental Registry of Ontario, and there's a link to that website there. So the comments on this act are not limited to Heritage Oakville, to staff, to council. Anyone can comment on them, and that is where you need to send your comments to. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Sorry for the long talk here and the heavy amount of text on your screen, but it is an awful lot of information to wade through in a rather short time frame.
Thank you, Sue. You've done a great job of presenting a very difficult topic. A lot of it is back office, and we wouldn't see much of it. But the resources required to deal with it, I guess that would be up to our councillors to handle in the fullness of time. Just a couple of quick questions. I noticed earlier when you were talking about principles, it said we had to seek the views of anybody around. Is there a suggestion there that we should have to post a notice like they do with Committee of Adjustment so as to encourage those views? Through you, Mr. Chair, that hasn't been a requirement that they've listed yet. I mean, it's certainly one way that you can get information out there, but I do think that the town does a really good job of making sure that these reports are available to the public so that they can review them in advance of the meetings and also participate in these meetings both
at Heritage Oakville and at Council. And I think we've had, we've definitely seen in the past that people who are interested in these topics are certainly willing to come and speak to Heritage Oakville and to Council. And the principal is simply saying that we consider their information, which, I do feel that we already do, but it's now very formalized.
Yep. Okay. And then the bylaws process was indicated to be clarified and simplified. If you had the time to go through all of the old bylaws to bring them up to date, which I don't know quite when that's ever going to happen, but would that be, under these new regulations, not an opening up of the actual designation itself, giving rise to appeals and so on and so forth, even if you were to try and expand the definition of the heritage features of the property?
No, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, if you're making very significant changes to a heritage designation bylaw, it certainly still would be open to appeal. I think in most cases to the property owner only, though. And so if you are working with the property owner on an amendment to an existing designation bylaw, that's certainly a consideration. Some of the changes that they've made to make the process easier are really, they're kind of behind the scenes tools that don't require as much notification, publication, things like that. We do still have to go through a formal and open process where people have the ability to comment, and there is limited opportunity to appeal, but it is still there.
Okay, I didn't think it was going to make it as easy as just rewriting it.
Not that easy.
But I thought I would ask. I'm sure that some municipalities that don't have the top-notch heritage planning staff that we do will find these new rules a lot more burdensome, but that's their problem, not ours. So Kathy is the first one raising her hand to speak. Anyone else wishing to speak? Dave? Okay, anybody else that wishes to do so, just wave later. So Kathy, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Susan. Susan, is there something that maybe Councillor Giddings and I can work with you offline to provide some sort of resolution at the council table to enhance what you're providing via just regular comments? The reason being, I sometimes get the impression that when comments go through, they're stamped and endorsed, but we don't really raise the awareness of the issue. And given several of the points that you raised this morning, I think we really need to zero in on those. And I think also there would be some benefit, especially given what the chair just mentioned, that in that resolution, we could ask that our resolution be circulated to AMO, which is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and our neighboring municipalities, so that they realize we are very concerned about these changes. And given the fact they realize we're very proactive and very strong in terms of advocating for our heritage, it might be of assistance. So as I say, I just leave that out there for you and Councillor Giddings and myself to work through if needs be.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can work at pulling the recommendations from each one of those sections into a summary that might be a little bit easier to read and digest if one doesn't have the time to go through a 10-page report.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Kathy. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Kathy for raising that, because I think this is far too important an issue and potential change to have Council move receipt of the report at our next Council meeting. I would like to make our Council colleagues aware of it and get comments on the record. With that in mind, have staff spoken with any of our other municipalities that you have perhaps an informal network with, in terms of their feelings, if they're consistent, if there are shared concerns?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we definitely have. We have an informal heritage planners network that involves planners practicing all throughout southern Ontario for the most part, but I guess as far up as maybe Barrie, maybe North Bay. So yes, we have had discussions with our colleagues in other municipalities to kind of share our, what do you think's good, what do you think's bad, and I know that a number of other municipalities will be coming forward with their own reports on this topic. Some, unfortunately, are struggling with the rather tight turnaround. Well, it was a quick, it was a report that had to be written quite quickly, given the amount of information that we had to digest in order to actually come up with something that made sense. Unfortunately, some municipalities have kind of completely missed it in their council window, which is why we always emphasize that it's not just municipalities who can make comments to the environmental registry. Anyone can do it, and they should as well. But I would say that the comments that Oakville has put forward, I think do kind of are shared by many of my colleagues across Ontario as well. And for example, I know that most of them have been provided with the link to the Town of Oakville report that you have just read, so they certainly know what we're saying. I don't think anyone else has released theirs yet officially.
All right, I appreciate that. So, as Councillor Duddick said, we could share it with our neighboring municipalities. We could also share it amongst your informal group, I believe is how you described it.
Yep,
So,
the report is public and it's available to anyone.
And so we can ask, like our report, it be circulated or sent to our local members of provincial parliament. The other communities can do that as well, and perhaps those that aren't resourced adequately to react quickly, they could share ours or a compilation of the others.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
All right, would we tie in heritage groups or historical groups in this to ask for their feedback? Would that be a logical extension?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I know some groups are already putting together their own comments. So, for example, the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals has put out a call to their membership in order to provide comments on behalf of the organization. That's the one I can list off the top of my head, as I am still a board member. So, but I assume that many other organizations will be putting forward comments as well, especially the organizations that come together to do the Provincial Heritage Conference, Community Heritage Ontario, and the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario as well.
Great stuff. Thanks, Susan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to comment? Jerry?
Thank you, Sue. That was a really complete, albeit complicated outlook of things. Good for you, and thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to ask you, along the line of Councillor Giddings outreaching, is there anything at the federal level that can oversee, assist, or tie into this provincial system, by way of even in terms of grants assistance for staff, but moreover, more so guidelines that can assist? Because there are the three. There's the municipal, federal, and municipal, provincial, and federal. So how does the federal body play into this, and can it play into this in a positive way to assist the municipalities is the question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's complicated. It's been my experience that federal organizations and bodies will not get involved in provincial matters. For example, I mentioned the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals providing comment. Technically, that's going through our Ontario chapter of Heritage Professionals. The National Trust for Canada might be an organization that might put forward comments as well. But given that provincial legislation differs so wildly across across Canada, I think it's unlikely that you'll see many kind of federal level organizations or agencies providing much comment at this time unless they have specific Ontario-based chapters.
Yes, so it's tough to have a national leadership on almost any issue in Canada because it's a provincial responsibility, and unless you've got a big bag of money in your hand, the provinces say keep out. I think the comment, or another comment I might make is that you were saying if it would be a concern if the overriding requirement for these changes is to increase development, which makes the should and shall very important, because a should gets you bulldozed and a shall maybe gets you a stay. My comment would be that that's a very important element to this, to try and give heritage a proper place. One hears there's plenty of land available for development, and it doesn't have to bulldoze heritage features in order to have the developments that are needed. Okay, any other comments from people? George?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you wholeheartedly. In fact, that kind of leads, your comment kind of leads us into the last item in the memorandum about how the tribunal has determined that the shall. They sort of kind of threw the shall aside and said it can't be shall. It has to be more moderate. That leads right into that next item. But I'd just like to commend staff on the excellent report and the details on it, because it's you also illustrated that you're talking about more development, and that's what drives this whole thing, rather than a renewal of some of the provisions in the Heritage Act. So I agree wholeheartedly, and also with councillors Gidding and Duddick that this should be more powerful, I think, if it came from council. Just a comment, not a question. Thank you.
That's a good comment, George. Sue, have you got enough sort of back from us? I mean, we're following your lead that generally speaking, these are good changes. And I always worry when I see the word housekeeping appearing anywhere, because you can hide a hell of a lot of stuff. It's just housekeeping. And it usually turns out to be a lot worse than just housekeeping.
We read it very carefully.
Yes, I hope so. Okay, so if there's no further discussion on that, the recommendation we have is that the report be endorsed and submitted to the province along with any council resolutions. Can I have a mover for that? George? Okay, so George has made the motion. Anyone opposed to that motion? Nope, the motion is carried. And thank you, Sue. I mean, it's just an excellent summary of something that could be a very difficult thing for many of us to understand. Okay, the next item on the agenda, we have a couple of information items. One is the sort of annual assessment of the condition of the white oak tree. You've all had the chance to read that. And then there's the other one is the memorandum that picks up on our recommendation that council direct staff to do a thorough evaluation of the impact of a recent LPAT decision. So these are the two things that we've received. The only comment I'd make is that I noticed with respect to the tree that an oak tree 260 to 300 years old is described as veteran, and often then shows increased crown thinning conditions. I can tell you some of us reach crown thinning a hell of a lot sooner than 250 years. But apart from that, I found the report really interesting. So that's an information item. I need a motion to receive it. From Brenda, thank you. Brenda has made the motion that we receive the information items. Anyone opposed to that motion? That motion is carried. Thank you. So the date and time of our next virtual meeting is Tuesday, the 17th of November. It'll be a virtual meeting again. I suspect that this format is going to be our format for some time to come, which is fine. We can still do the things that we need to do. So I thank you all very much again for the gift of your time today and for your input. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn. I'll take that from Kerry. Thank you. No one will be opposed to that. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much indeed. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.